The story begins on Arrakis, a planet surrounded by arid desert. The people who live on this planet are called Fremen. Despite the aridity, the sand on this planet contains very valuable spices. The spices are not ordinary spices, but dust substances that can be used as the main ingredient of navigation tools, so that spaceships can travel between stars very quickly. That's why these spices are so valuable. The natives of Arrakis have blue eyes, having been exposed to this spice for the past 80 years. Arrakis was colonized by the Harkonnen family. The Harkonnen harvested the spices here, making them a very wealthy family. But the natives of the planet Arrakis, the Fremen, didn't like the Harkonnen, who destroyed the environment doubled and even more. The Fremen then tried to fight back, but in vain. Surprisingly, one day Emperor Shaddam ordered the Harkonnen family to leave the planet Arrakis to a planet called Caladan. A young man named Paul Atreides was the crown prince of the Atreides family who ruled this planet. He is the son of Jessica and the leader of the Atreides clan, Duke Leto Atreides. Jessica is from the Bene Gesserit tribe, a group of witches whose members are women. Jessica has the ability to control a person's mind through voice commands called the Voice. Jessica trained Paul to be able to use this ability as well, but until now Paul hasn't been able to master it. Rumor has it that the Emperor appointed the Atreides family to replace the Harkonnen family to mine spices on the planet Arrakis. Paul also began to look for information about the Arrakis, starting from the desert to the Fremen tribe that lives there. This Fremen tribe wears a special suit called the Steel Suite. The suit can recycle water in the heat of the desert. Giant worms also live on the planet Arrakis. The biggest giant sandworm is called Shai-Hulud. Emperor Shaddam IV's envoys finally came to the palace of Atreides. Among the group, Jessica saw her teacher from the Bene Gesserit tribe named Helen, a Reverend Mother Mohiam, who was now the Emperor's confidant. Here, the Emperor said that the Atreides family must immediately take over the Arrakis. Leto cold help would obey the Emperor's orders. Leto gave the seal of his family as a sign that he was willing. In the afternoon, Paul met his martial arts teacher named Duncan Idaho. Duncan received orders to go to the planet Arrakis first to check on the situation there. Paul wanted to come, but Duncan told him not to. Paul also told Duncan about his recent dreams. Paul often dreams about the Fremen tribe on the Arrakis. In the dream, Paul saw a Fremen girl. Paul also saw that Duncan was going to die. Duncan told Paul not to worry, because it was just a dream. Paul then approached his father. Paul asked permission to go with Duncan to Arrakis first, but Leto firmly forbade him. Leto wouldn't let anything bad happen to Paul, because Paul was his successor to lead the Atreides family clan. Ready or not, this was the destiny that Paul had to live with. Leto told Paul that he found the Emperor's order very strange. The Emperor seemed to deliberately pit the Atreides family against the Harkonnen family. Later, arriving on the planet Arrakis, Leto wants to try to ally with the Fremen tribe there. Who knows, they could join forces together. That is why Leto sent Duncan to Arrakis first, to meet the Fremen tribe. After Duncan's departure, Paul practiced martial arts with the commander of the Atreides army named Gurney Halleck. Paul also activated his shield. Here Gurney asks Paul to train hard because the family's position is under threat. Gurney knew the Harkonnen family wouldn't easily give up the planet Arrakis just like that. Paul must be prepared for any situation that could happen. On a planet called JD Prime, the Harkonnen family's warlord Glosser Rabban purported to the leader of the Harkonnen family, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, who was also Rabban's uncle, that their last airship had left the planet Arrakis. Rabban was angry and didn't accept why the Emperor told the Harkonnen family to leave planet Arrakis, and now the Emperor was handing over the planet to the Atreides family. Baron casually explained that the Atreides family's influence was getting stronger among the other families, and the Emperor doesn't like it when family gets too powerful. One evening, Jessica took Paul to see her teacher, Helen, the Reverend Mother Mohiam, who had secretly sneaked into the Atreides palace. Jessica said that Mother Helen wanted to know about dreams. Before meeting Helen, Paul was first examined for his health by Dr. Wellington Yu. A confused Paul asked what was going on. Dr. Yu replied that he didn't know. He asked Paul to be careful. Jessica also asked Dr. Yu to keep this a secret from anyone. Jessica and Paul then meet Mother Helen in a room. Helen told Jessica to leave. Hearing this made Paul angry, because his mother was expelled from her own palace. Helen then used the power of the voice to move Paul's body. Helen told Paul to put his hand in a box. After Paul put his hand inside, Helen aimed the poisoned needle at Paul's neck. Whatever happens, Helen forbids Paul to take his hand out of the box. Otherwise, Helen would kill Paul. Slowly, Paul began to feel the pain in his hand, but Paul still tried to hold on and not take his hand out. The box gave him the pain of someone who was about to die. At this point, Paul began to have visions of raging fires and devastating battles. Moments later, Helen stopped the test. Helen said that she was conducting a test. If Paul couldn't control himself like an animal, then Paul would be killed. Paul had many powers passed down by his mother, Jessica. Helen then called Jessica. Jessica was relieved to see that her son was still alive. Helen asked about Paul's dream. Paul said that he had repeatedly dreamed of a girl from the Fremen tribe. After the test, outside, Helen scolded Jessica for giving birth to a boy instead of a girl. Jessica then said that her son could be the predicted Kwisatz Haderach, the Messiah who would bring salvation and prosperity to the entire universe. But Helen wasn't convinced because Paul's abilities weren't enough. Helen said Paul would surely die in the next test. Helen then left on the plane. It turned out that Paul had been listening to Jessica's conversation with Helen. Paul was angry because his mother had never told him about Kwisatz Haderach. Jessica also tells him that Kwisatz Haderach is the Messiah, a great person who can see the future and the past, so that he can make a better future. A few days later, the Atreides family finally arrived on the planet Arrakis. There was already Leto's right-hand man named Thufir Hawat, who had arrived on the planet Arrakis first. Thufir was tasked with securing Arrakis before Leto arrived. Then they were greeted by the inhabitants of Arrakis, who shouted at Paul as a Lisan al-Gaib. Paul and Jessica then boarded a desert airplane called Topters. Paul asked his mother what Lisan al-Gaib meant. Jessica explained that Lisan al-Gaib is the voice of God, the Messiah, the Kwisatz Haderach. It turned out that the locals of the planet Arrakis saw signs of the supernatural in Paul. They then arrived at the main base, which was surrounded by a barrier that protected against extreme weather and a giant worm called Shai Hulud. Once there, Leto and Gurney observed the surroundings. Leto told Gurney to guard the spice mine. They must be able to work immediately to mine spices on this planet. Meanwhile, inside, Thufir prepared several women who would become Jessica's servants. Jessica chose a woman named Shadout Mapes. Jessica said that she knew Shadout Mapes kept a weapon under her shirt. Shadout also took out a sacred dagger called Crisp-Knife. Crisp-Knife is a dagger made of giant worm teeth. Shadout gave the dagger as a gift because she saw Jessica and Paul as Lisan al-Gaib. In another room, while Paul was learning about the planet Arrakis, he saw a small robot that was very deadly. Paul knew that the robot must have been sent to kill him. However, Paul could catch it. Thufir and the Atreides soldiers then searched for the robot's operator. They then found a Harkonnen soldier hiding behind a wall controlling the killer robot. They kill the man immediately. The scene moves to the planet Giedi Prime. Baron Vladimir is visited by Mother Helen. Here, Mother Helen tells him that the Emperor will send Sardaukar troops to help the Harkonnen family. The assistance aims to destroy the Atreides family, who are currently on the planet Arrakis. In the action later, Mother Helen asked Baron to promise not to hurt Jessica and Paul, because they were both part of the Bene Gesserit tribe. Baron also agreed to that. Back on planet Arrakis, Thufir reported that they were having trouble mining spices with the equipment left behind by the Harkonnen family. That was because most of the equipment was in a state of disrepair. The Harkonnens must have deliberately damaged all the mining equipment before they left. Leto then asked Thufir to call a supervising officer from the Emperor who was overseeing this transfer of power. Elsewhere, Duncan finally appeared. For 4 weeks, Duncan lived with the Fremen tribe. Duncan told him that the Freemen lived in a community called Sciches. They hide in the desert. There are many Sciches communities in this desert. One Siege can accommodate 10,000 people. Duncan estimates that there are many tribes of Fremen living on the planet Arrakis. Then he told that he almost died because the Fremen tribe was very good at fighting. Luckily, Duncan survived and was able to blend in with the Fremen tribe. At this time, Duncan invited one of the Siege leaders named Stilgar. Here Stilgar said that the Atreides family could take spices, but the condition is never to disturb the Fremen. Leto also promised that as long as he ruled here, the Fremen would be safe. The next day, the Emperor's overseer named Dr. Liet Kynes met Leto. Kynes would accompany Leto to the spice harvest field in the middle of the desert. In order to survive in the desert, they had to wear steel suits made by the Fremen tribe. Kynes explains that the steel suits cool the body and recycle water lost through sweat. They then set off in 3 copters to harvest spices on the planet Arrakis. They used a device called a crawler. From high above, they could see grains of gold in the sand. That was the spice. Kynes then tells that mining this spice is very risky because giant worms can appear at any time. Giant worms are attracted to rhythmic sounds like footsteps and engine noise. The worms will come up when they are about to attack. They can't use shields, as that will only make and trigger the giant worms angry. From afar, Leto saw signs of the approaching giant worms. Kynes immediately contacted the crawler, informing it of the approaching worms. The crawler operator then called a carryall vehicle to move the crawler to safety. The carryall then arrived. It began to hammer the anchor onto the carryall. But unfortunately, there was one broken anchor, so the carryall couldn't lift the crawler. Seeing the giant worm getting closer, Leto finally made the decision to evacuate all the workers in the crawler into the plane. Long story short, they landed. Kynes asked Paul to help her guide the crawler crew into the plane. The crew inevitably had to leave the crawler. They ran according to Paul's directions. Paul accidentally inhaled the spice that were there. He then heard strange voices calling him Kwisatz Haderach. By the time everyone had gotten into the plane, but Kynes realized that Paul wasn't there. Kynes went out and resuscitated Paul, who seemed to be in a trance. Seeing the approaching giant worm, they both ran quickly to get on the plane. After returning to the base, Leto told Kynes that all the equipment left by the Harkonnen family was damaged. Leto felt framed. Kynes couldn't help either, because her job wasn't to help Leto and his family. He was just a supervisor. Inside, Dr. Yu checked on Paul. He said that what happened to Paul just now was an allergic reaction to spices, but Paul denied it. Paul said that he had another vision. There Paul saw a girl. In the vision, the girl gave Paul a dagger. In the vision, Paul also saw his mother holding a baby. Paul then told his mother that he already knew she was pregnant. Jessica was shocked how Paul could know that, because she herself only found out yesterday. On a planet called Seleucia Secundus is a planet where the Empire's elite troops called Sardaukar troops train. Harkonnen's envoy named Piter de Vries met the leader of the Sardaukar troops to ask for the help of 3 Sardaukar troops battalions to attack the Atreides family. Long story short, like any other night, Dr. Yu gave a sleeping pill to Leto and his family. But that night Leto didn't take the sleeping pills. In the middle of the night, Leto saw strange lights outside. Leto went to check the situation. Then he saw his servant, Shadout, who was killed by a crysknife. Suddenly, Leto's back was shot by a poisonous needle, thus paralyzing his body. It turns out that the culprit is Dr. Yu. Outside, all Atreides soldiers are on alert, because the shield at the headquarters has been damaged. From above came the planes of the Harkonnen family. They came to attack. In an instant, the atmosphere changed. Harkonnen destroyed the Atreides family's warplanes with the help of the Sardaukar troops. The Harkonnen troops could slaughter the Atreides troops and break into the headquarters. Inside, Dr. Yu apologized to Leto. He was no choice to betray, because Baron kidnapped and held his wife. Dr. Yu then pulled out the Atreides king's ring to give to Paul, because Paul and his mother would be saved. Dr. Yu then replaced one of Leto's teeth with a poison capsule. The poison capsule can spread deadly poison throughout the room. Later, if he meets the Baron, Leto can bite the fake tooth to kill the Baron. Elsewhere, Duncan fought with the Sardaukar soldiers who had broken into the base, but he was too late. Paul and Jessica have been kidnapped by Harkonnen's forces. Paul and Jessica were taken up in a copter. They weren't going to hurt Paul and Jessica, but they were ordered to drop Jessica and Paul in the middle of the desert to be eaten by giant worms. Jessica's mouth is deliberately duct-taped because Harkonnen knows Jessica has the voice's ability to control their mind. Jessica also communicates with Paul using sign language. She told Paul to let out his voice. Paul tried, but failed. As Harkonnen started to open the door to the plane to throw them both out, Paul focused his mind so that his voice would work. Paul tried again, and then it worked. Paul told the Harkonnen to take off Jessica's duct tape. Once her mouth was open, Jessica used the voice ability to influence the Harkonnen to kill each other. Here, Paul found the box of supplies. The plane they were on was then shut down remotely. Paul and Jessica are no choice to walk. Inside the base, Leto woke up from faint. In front of him were Baron and his followers. Piter then came with Dr. Yu. Because he had helped Baron catch Leto, Dr. Yu wanted to get a promise. He wanted to see his wife. Baron then approached Dr. Yu to give him what he wanted. It turned out that Baron killed Dr. Yu instead. Baron then activated the shield on his body and talked to Leto up close. With his rest of power, Leto destroyed the poisonous tooth, made everyone in the room died instantly. In the middle of the desert, Paul and Jessica hid in a sand cave made using tools they found from the supply box. Paul later found a letter written by Dr. Yu. In the supply box, Paul also found a scroll containing his family's seal ring. That means his father must be dead. Elsewhere, Duncan, who managed to escape, came to Kynes. Duncan asked Kynes to tell the Emperor that the Atreides family had been betrayed. Kynes said that she was ordered by the Emperor not to say anything, and pretended not to see anything. And Kynes finally realized that the Emperor deliberately sent the Atreides family to this planet Arrakis to be slaughtered. Meanwhile, since inhaling the spice, Paul's visions were getting clearer. Paul saw the apparition of the Fremen girl again. Paul said, "The war on this planet triggered wars throughout the galaxy. It's like a fire that can't be put out." Paul saw himself with blue eyes and was engaged in a holy war against the Emperor's army. Paul was terrified to see this. Paul has now realized that what he saw was a vision of the future. Jessica calmed her son down. After Paul calmed down, he put on the ring left by his father. Paul finally accepted his destiny to become the leader of the Atreides family to succeed his father. Paul and Jessica then came out of their cave. Then they met up with Duncan. Seeing the ring on Paul's hand, Duncan immediately knelt down as a tribute to the new leader of the Atreides clan. They then flew off with Kynes, who was now flying to Paul's defense. Kynes takes them to the former ecology station building because a storm is coming soon. The station was used to extract water from the planet to turn the planet Arrakis green. But after spices were discovered among the grains of sand, the project was halted. People chose to mine spices instead of greening the planet. The building was then used by the Fremen to hide. There Paul told Kynes that if the massacre became known to the other families, he could get the other family clans to unite against the Emperor. Paul asks Kynes to help him get off the planet. Paul also has another plan, which is to marry the Emperor's single daughter to seize power. Kynes also said that the Emperor wouldn't let that happen, because the Emperor was afraid of the Atreides family, whose influence was getting stronger among the other families. That is why the Emperor destroyed the Atreides family. Outside, it turned out that the Sardaukar army came to attack the station. Hearing that there was chaos outside, Duncan intended to help fight. Paul tried to stop him, but it was too late. Duncan had already left and closed the door. Finally, Paul's dream of Duncan dying on the battlefield came true. Kynes then led Paul and Jessica to escape. Kynes gave Paul and Jessica steel suits so they could survive in the desert. He then told Paul and Jessica to board the copter that had been provided and fly at high altitude in order to survive the storm. Kynes then told Paul to go south and find a community of Fremen who would help him there. Meanwhile, Kynes herself will look for help. Paul and Jessica then flew off using the copter that was already there. Elsewhere, Kynes was attacked by Sardaukar soldiers. Before dying, it turns out that Kynes installed a giant worm summoning device. The giant worm then appeared to eat the Sardaukar soldiers and Kynes who were there. Meanwhile, 3 airplanes were chasing Paul. Like Kynes' previous message, in order for them to survive, Paul must direct his copter into the storm and climb to the top. 3 enemy missiles were fired in a very strong windstorm, making it difficult for Paul's plane to ascend. Fortunately, the 3 missiles chasing him were destroyed in the storm. Later, the storm damaged the propeller of the copters Paul was flying. Suddenly, Paul had a vision, a Fremen who gave him advice not to fight the wave storm. Paul then let go of the controls and let the airplane drift in the storm. Inside the base, it turns out that Baron is not dead. However, he had to undergo treatment in the spice liquid. Rabban then came to report that Paul and Jessica had entered the storm. The 2 of them would definitely not survive the storm. Baron also ordered Rabban to mine more spices, because Baron needed a lot of income to cover the losses from the recent war. He also ordered Rabban to kill all the Fremen on the planet. In the storm, Paul and Jessica could get out of the storm safely. But unfortunately, their airplane engine was damaged. As a result, they had no choice but to land. Paul and Jessica must find the Fremen community called Sietch with a special compass given by Duncan. Paul and Jessica then walked through the desert towards the south. They were walking in the area of giant worms, so they had to walk like Fremen, which is called the sand road, which is dragging the steps on sand, so as not to make a sound. In the distance, they saw a giant worm moving, but Paul and Jessica kept calm as they walked on the sand road. Moments later, Paul stepped on a sand dram, a sand trap that made a sound. The giant worm came closer. Paul and Jessica immediately ran with all their might towards the rocks. Arriving at the rocks, the giant worm that was chasing them surfaced. But strangely, the giant worm just stayed still. The giant worm then left, because it was distracted by the sound of a tamper installed by someone. Paul and Jessica then took cover behind the rocks. It turned out that there were many Fremen who surrounded them. The leader of the group was Stilgar, who was previously brought by Duncan to meet Leto. A Fremen named Jamis forced Stilgar to kill Paul and Jessica to retrieve the water in their bodies. But Stilgar said that they couldn't kill Paul. Stilgar believes that Paul is a Lisan Alghabe, but the rest of the Fremen didn't believe it. Jamis said that they both survived the giant worm because of the tamper he installed, not because of Paul's ability. Seeing an opportunity, Paul and Jessica then tried to fight the group of Fremen. Paul grabbed the Fremen's weapons and climbed to the top, then pointed the gun. Unexpectedly, it turns out that Jessica also has fighting skills and is able to corner Stilgar. Stilgar told Paul and Jessica to calm down. He would take them both to their settlement called Sietch Tabor. They would decide Paul and Jessica's fate there. Suddenly, a Fremen girl appeared from behind Paul. She was the girl who had always been in Paul's vision. The girl's name is Chani. Here Jamis still doesn't agree that Paul should join their group. Jamis also proposed an Amtal. Amtal is a fight to the death. Before the Amtal began, Paul had a vision that Jamis had stabbed him. Chani then approached Paul. Chani didn't believe that Paul was Lisan Alghabe or the chosen Mahdi, but he wanted Paul to die honorably, so Chani gave him her crysknife dagger to fight with. This was exactly the same as Paul's previous vision. The Amtal battle began. Unexpectedly, Paul was able to aim his dagger at Jamis' neck. Paul told Jamis to surrender, but Stilgar said to end the Amtal battle. One of them had to die. Paul hesitated, as he had never killed anyone. But finally, Paul managed to kill Jamis. With Jamis' death, Paul was finally accepted into Stilgar's group. Then Jessica reminded Paul that they both had to try to find a way to leave this planet. But apparently Paul doesn't want that. He wants to stay on this planet, continuing his father's plan. His father's main purpose in coming to the planet Arrakis wasn't to take spices, but to form an alliance with the Fremen. Paul saw that he was destined to settle in this desert, build up his strength, and later fight against the emperor. On the way, Paul saw a Fremen riding a giant worm. Chaney said that it was nothing, because later Paul will see things that are far greater than that. And then the movie Dune Part 1 ended. The sequel story begins again. After the massacre of the Atreides family by the Harkonnen family with the help of Emperor Shaddam's Sardaukar army on the planet Arrakis, the Harkonnen family doesn't know that Paul and his mother, Jessica, are still alive. The Harkonnen leader, Baron Vladimir, appointed his nephew, Rabban, to be the governor of the planet Arrakis. The Baron orders Rabban to exterminate Arrakis' native inhabitants, called Fremen, so that they can increase the production of spices on the planet. Somewhere in the desert, Paul and Jessica join a group of Fremen, after Paul defeats a Fremen tribe member named Jameis. The leader of this group of Fremen named Stilgar believes that Paul is the Lisan al-Gaib, a figure who has long been predicted to come to save the planet Arrakis, the one who will lead the Fremen tribe to freedom. Here, Paul finally meets the girl who has always been there in his dreams. The girl is named Chani. On the way, the group went into hiding, having heard Harkonnen's airship approaching. Secretly, the Fremen could defeat the Harkonnen troops who came one by one. Here, Paul also shows his fighting skills, defeating one of the Harkonnen soldiers. The Fremen then extracted water from the corpses of the dead Harkonnen warriors. After that, they summoned a giant worm using a thamper. The giant worm then came to eat the pile of Harkonnen warrior corpses that were there. Inside the Harkonnen headquarters in the city of Arrakis, Rabban went berserk because he received reports that some of his men were killed by the Fremen. Then Rabban ordered everyone to slaughter all the Fremen on this planet. Elsewhere, Paul and his group of Fremen finally arrived at a place called Siege Tabor. It was the home of the Fremen inside the stone hill. Once inside, some of the Fremen who were there shouted at Paul with the name Lisan al-Gaib. They believed that Paul was the Messiah who had been predicted to come. Stilgar then held a meeting with the elders regarding the arrival of Paul and Jessica. Stilgar shared all the signs that proved Paul was the Lisan al-Gaib. Stilgar was convinced that Paul was the savior they had been waiting for. The elders, of course, could not believe it, because if this is true, then Paul's mother, Jessica, must immediately be appointed Reverend Mother. To prove it, they will perform a sacred ritual on Jessica to drink the water of life that comes from the body fluids of a highly toxic giant worm. If Jessica survives and stays alive, then the prophecy is true and Jessica will be inaugurated as Reverend Mother. Stilgar then took Jessica to see the sacred river. It was a place where Fremen collected water from the bodies of dead Fremen. Although the water in the river was very abundant, the Fremen wouldn't dare to drink the water there, because it was basically the graves of the Fremen. Stilgar then said that he believed Paul was the savior. Stilgar knew Jessica understood about the prophecy, as Jessica herself was a Bene Gesserit. To prove whether Paul is really the savior or not, they will held a ritual on Jessica. If Jessica manages to survive the ritual, then Jessica will be inaugurated as the Mother Superior to replace the current Mother Leader, who is very old. But if Jessica refuses to participate in the ritual, then Paul is not the Lisan al-Gaib, and they will both be killed. Jessica had no other choice. She was forced to follow the ritual to become the Mother Leader, even though the risk was that she had to drink very dangerous water of life. Reportedly, the water can make anyone who drinks it can see the past. The next day, the ritual was performed. Paul waited outside, while Jessica was brought into the ritual site. Outside, Chani and some of her friends were laughing. Paul was confused why Chani was laughing. Chani then told him that on the planet Arrakis, the Fremen were made up of two major tribes. Chani and her friends are from the northern tribe. They didn't believe in prophecies, or it could say that Chani didn't believe that Paul was the savior, while people who come from the southern tribe really believe in the prophecy, like Stilgar, who comes from the southern tribe. Long story short, inside, Jessica was told to drink blue living water that came from the body of a giant worm. The water was highly poisonous. Jessica could die, but if she survives, Jessica will be able to see the past. Despite her fear, Jessica drank it anyway. Jessica immediately groaned in pain. The water made the content in her stomach turn blue and made the baby in her womb have blue eyes like Fremen. Long story short, Jessica survived. That means she is the new Reverend Mother. Stilgar was even more convinced that Paul was the Lisan Alkaib because his mother, Jessica, had survived, just like in the prophecy. But Chani and her friends still didn't believe in the prophecy. According to Chani, Lisan Alkaib should come from the Fremen themselves, not from people outside the planet. Paul intervened in the argument. He said that his mother could survive the deadly poison because his mother was a highly trained Bene Gesserit who could survive the deadly poison. So it wasn't unusual that his mother could survive. Paul himself felt that he wasn't a Lisan Alkaib. Paul said that he didn't come here to be a leader, but he wanted to blend in and learn the Fremen's way of life. A few days later, Jessica told Paul to drink the water of life. According to Jessica, Paul, who was a Bene Gesserit descendant, could already see the future, even if only in glimpses. By drinking the water of life, Paul would be able to see the past, and his ability to see the future would be perfect. That way, Paul would truly become a Kwisatz Haderach, or what the Fremen call a Lisan Alkaib. But Paul refused vehemently. Paul wasn't interested in becoming any of that. Stilgar then invited Paul to learn how to survive as the Fremen. Meanwhile, Chani taught Paul how to step in the desert properly so that he could avoid being attacked by giant worms. Over time, Paul was able to adapt quickly. He could survive in the desert just like the Fremen. Elsewhere, Jessica influenced the Fremen to make them believe that Paul was the Lisan Alkaib. Paul then followed Stilgar and his army to destroy Harkonnen's spice mining equipment. With his extraordinary fighting skills, Paul could help the Fremen destroy the giant mining machine. Later that night, Stilgar praised Paul's extraordinary fighting skills. Paul also tells him that his family, the Atreides family, has been at odds with the Harkonnen family for hundreds of years. Paul had memorized all of Harkonnen's war technologies and tactics. With this knowledge, Paul offered to help the Fremen destroy Harkonnen. At the same time, Paul also wants revenge for the death of his family. Paul doesn't care if he will die later when fighting Harkonnen. Hearing this, Stilgar appointed Paul to become a Fedaykin or Fremen soldier. Stilgar then told Paul to choose a Fremen name as a war name. Paul chose the name Muad'Dib, which means desert rat. Stilgar liked the name because Muad'Dib has another meaning, one who's showing the way. From now on, the Fremen would call Paul by the name Muad'Dib. While resting, Paul asked what Chani's war name was. Chani told him that her war name was Sahaya, which means desert spring. But Chani hates the name. She preferred to be called just Chani. To cut a long story short, with Paul's help, the Fremen destroyed Harkonnen's spice mining machines with ease. On the other hand, the longer he lived among the Fremen, Paul's eyes became blue due to frequent exposure to spices, just like the Fremen. Elsewhere, the Baron was furious with Rabban for his inability to handle the Fremen's attacks. The Baron told Rabban to solve the problem. If not, he would be fired from the position of governor of the planet. One night, Paul had a nightmare. In his dream, Paul followed a woman to the southern region of Arrakis, but instead, Paul saw dead bodies lying around and suffering everywhere. Paul realized that it wasn't an ordinary dream, but a vision of the future. During the day, Paul saw a Fremen who could ride a giant worm. Paul told Chani that he really wanted to try it. Chani said that it was very dangerous, but if Paul succeeded in doing it, then he would become a full-fledged Fremen. Long story short, after receiving training from Stilgar, Paul was finally told to practice riding the giant worm. Stilgar and the others were worried. After reaching the top of the dune, Paul began to set up the tamper to lure the giant worm. A few moments later, Stilgar and the others were surprised to see that the worm that came was very large. Paul began to get ready. After the giant worm passed beside him, Paul jumped onto the worm's body with a hook. Paul gripped the giant worm's body from above. With great difficulty, Paul finally could control the huge worm. Everyone cheered. Stilgar was even more convinced that Paul was the Lisan Alkaib, because the prophecy said that the Lisan Alkaib could ride a giant worm. After the news that Paul could ride a giant worm spread, more and more Fremen believed that Paul was the savior. Jessica planned to go to the south to spread the prophecy to the southern tribes. Jessica invites Paul to go south, but Paul firmly refuses. Paul told his mother about the glimpse of the future he had seen. In the dream, if Paul went to the south, there would be a great war across the galaxy. It made billions of lives suffer. Jessica finally left alone. As Paul watched his mother leave, he remembered the woman in his dream. It turned out that the woman was his own mother. Jessica and her party traveled to the south on a giant worm through a massive sandstorm. The Harkonnen had never been there in the south because they thought there was no life there. But in fact, there were millions of Fremen living there. A few days later, Paul and the Fremen bombed Harkonnen's spice warehouse. Suddenly, this angered Rabban. He then led the troops to chase the Fremen who attacked him. Rabban's men followed the Fremen. However, the Fremen disappeared when they passed a hill. An emotional Rabban then bombed the hill in front of him. After that, Rabban and his troops went down to check. Suddenly, from behind a puff of smoke, the Fremen silently attacked Harkonnen's troops. Seeing his men fall, Rabban finally ran away. News of a man named Muad'Dib leading the Fremen to destroy the spice production finally reached by Emperor Shaddam and his daughter, Princess Irulan. Based on this information, Muad'Dib was revered like a prophet by the Fremen. Princess Irulan then discussed the Muad'Dib's appearance with the mother of the Bene Gesserit chief. Irulan had a hunch that Muad'Dib was the living Paul. If it was true, Reverend Mother forbade Irulan to tell anyone about it. Because if Paul is still alive, he can tell the other great families that Emperor Shaddam helped the Harkonnen family slaughter the Atreides family. That would cause a schism and a major war in the galaxy. The Reverend Mother then made a plan to prevent that from happening. She targeted someone named Feyd Rautha, one of the Baron's nephews who would replace Rabban as governor of Arrakis. Feyd Rautha himself was both descendants of Bene Gesserit. That meant Feyd Rautha had the same abilities as Paul, but the difference is that he is more cruel than Paul. Bene Gesserit then sent its member named Margot Fenring to the planet Guided Prime, where the Harkonnen family lived. Feyd Rautha's birthday party was being celebrated there. They did so by making Feyd Rautha fight 3 prisoners from the Atreides family. Brutally, Feyd Rautha killed all 3 prisoners. Seeing this, the Baron was even more convinced of his nephew's ability. After the battle, Baron ordered Feyd to replace Rabban as the governor of the planet Arrakis. Baron believed that Feyd could eradicate the Fremen, who had been disturbing their spice production. Later that night, Margot secretly met Feyd. Feyd said that he seemed to have met Margot in his dream. Margot, who is a sufferer, then uses the voice, making Feyd do what she says. Margot conducted a test on Feyd. A few days later, Margot met the Mother Leader and Princess Irulan to convey the test results to Feyd. Margot said that although Feyd was very cruel and ambitious, he could be controlled by women with the lure of sex. Margot herself had also made Feyd produce a baby inside her stomach. On the planet Arrakis, because Harkonnen's spice mining is stagnant, illegal miners are freely mining spices. One group of illegal miners was then intercepted by the Fremen's troops. Paul then came forward. It turns out that the illegal miner he faced was his own teacher named Gurney. It turns out that Gurney survived the massacre and is now an illegal spice miner. Paul invited Gurney to join him. Paul also tells Gurney that he will help the Fremen destroy Harkonnen, as well as revenge for the massacre that Harkonnen committed against the Atreides family. But after seeing that there were only 200 troops with Paul, it was impossible to fight Harkonnen. Gurney advised Paul to go south, gathering all the Fremen troops to help him. But Paul didn't want to go south. It was because in his future vision, if he went south, there would be a great war and suffering everywhere. Paul didn't want that to happen. Gurney told him that even if Paul didn't go south, there would still be a great war. Because Paul insisted on not going south, Gurney told Paul the place where the Atreides family kept dozens of nuclear bombs on this planet. Gurney also took Paul and his group to the place where the nuclear bombs were kept by the door. The bomb storage can only be opened by a descendant of the Atreides nobility. Paul began to open it and apparently succeeded. Inside, dozens of nuclear warheads were lined up. They will use these bombs to destroy Harkonnen. Elsewhere, Jessica finally arrives in the southern tribe. She began to spread the word about the arrival of the Lisan Alkaib. Jessica then visited the shrine of the Holy Fremen. She told the shrine guard to extract the water of life from the body of the baby giant worm that was there. Jessica then told the guardian that one day her son would come. Jessica told the temple guard to give the water of life to her son the next time he came here. Later that night, Paul suddenly woke up because he heard a rumbling sound from afar. From a distance, they saw that the siege taper was being bombarded by Harkonnen. It turned out that Feed could find the Fremen's house, located inside the stone hill. Many Fremen were killed in this attack. The destruction of Siege Tabor triggered the formation of a war council in the south. All Fremen leaders across the planet were required to travel south to attend the meeting. Later, Stilgar asked Paul to replace him, as he was injured. Paul still refused to go. Paul then pondered. Paul closed his eyes, and then heard his mother's voice telling Paul to go south and then drink the water of life, so that Paul could open his mind. Chani then came over to Paul. Chani persuaded Paul to go south. Paul told her that if she went south, there would be a big war. He was afraid that he would lose Chani. Chani assured him that Paul wouldn't lose her. Chani will always be by Paul's side. Hearing this, Paul finally agreed to go south. Everyone went south on some giant worms to the southern tribe. Arriving in the south, Paul went alone to the shrine. The guardian of the temple then approached Paul. He handed Paul the water of life. Paul drank the water. Paul immediately saw the future. There he saw the ocean on the planet Arrakis. Paul also saw a woman who turned out to be his adult little sister, even though at this time his sister had not yet been born. As a result of drinking the highly toxic water of life, Paul was dying. A worried Chani rushed over to Paul. Here, Jessica said that she needed Chani's help, just like in the prophecy. The prophecy said that the Lisan Alkaid would rise from the dead by drinking the tears of the Desert Spring. Desert Spring, or Sahaya, is Chani's war name. Chani refused vehemently at first. Jessica used the voice to force Chani. Suddenly, Chani burst into tears. Then she wiped away her tears. Chani mixed the tears with the water of life and put them on Paul's lips. Suddenly, Paul opened his eyes again. Paul had really revived. Stilgar was even more convinced that Paul was Lisan Alkaib, but Chani hated it. Later that night, Paul told his mother that he could see the past and the future very clearly. Of the thousands of possible futures he saw, Paul could see a possibility where he would win. Paul also said that from his past visions, Paul saw that his mother was the daughter of the Baron, the leader of the Harkonnen family. That meant Paul was the Baron's grandson. Jessica then said that she also found out that fact after drinking the water of life. After learning this fact, Paul decided to live like the Harkonnen, which is cruel and merciless. At noon, while the meeting of the leaders of the Fremen was in progress, Paul walked into the center of the room. The members of the Fremen, who still didn't believe that Paul was a Lisan Alkaib, forbade Paul to act arbitrarily in this meeting. Paul then approached one of the people he didn't know. Paul was surprisingly able to tell the person's past exactly. This surprised everyone. Everyone finally believed that Paul was really the savior they had been waiting for. They all bowed down before Paul. Paul then said that he would lead the Fremen to freedom. Paul then wore the Atreides ring left by his late father. Paul declared himself as Lisan Alkaib, the leader of the Fremen on this planet. Everyone cheered, except for Chani, who was sad to see him. Paul then sent a letter to Emperor Shaddam. The letter contained that Paul challenged the Emperor to come to the planet Arrakis to be responsible for his actions, helping Harkonnen massacre the Atreides family. Princess Irulan then told the Mother Leader about the letter. The Mother Leader wasn't at all surprised by Paul's actions. This is because all this time, the continent has been preparing for the awakening of Kwisatz Haderach, who can see the future and the past. They had passed on the seed of Bene Gesserit to the Atreides family. But the Atreides family became too powerful, and they couldn't control it. It turned out that the mastermind of the Atrides family slaughter was the mother leader herself. She told the emperor to massacre the Atrides family. Hearing this, Princess Irulan was afraid that Paul would win this battle. The Mother Superior then said, "Whoever wins, Emperor Shaddam will still lose his throne." But there was still one way for the emperor's family to still in power, which was for Princess Irulan to marry whoever won this battle. The emperor finally accepted Paul's challenge. He came to Arrakis bringing hundreds of thousands of Sardaukar troops. Baron, who panicked at the arrival of the emperor and his troops, told Feed to contact the other great families, telling them that there would be a big war starting from this planet. Elsewhere, Paul devised a plan to destroy Harkonnen, as well as coup the emperor here. Paul divided the Fremen army into several groups. Paul would lead the hundreds thousands of Fremen troops who joined this war. Baron, Rabban, and Feed then went to the emperor. Inside the camp, the emperor asked if the Baron knew who the Muad'Dib was. Baron replied that he didn't know. The emperor then asked why Baron hadn't taken control of the south. Baron said that the southern region was uninhabitable, but the emperor found signs of life there. Baron assured that he wasn't lying. The angry Sardaukar commander then cut off the Baron's oxygen balloon, leaving the Baron helpless. Outside, Paul began his mission by firing missiles at the emperor's camp. A huge explosion occurred, leaving many Sardaukar soldiers dead from this attack. The surviving soldiers then got back up. Suddenly, some giant worms came carrying an army of Fremen, rummaging through the emperor's military camp. Thousands of Fremen troops then emerged from hiding. They attacked the Sardaukar and Harkonnen soldiers who were there. Long story short, the Fremen took control of the emperor's camp. Paul and some of his men then entered the camp to meet the emperor. Paul approached the helpless Baron. Paul cruelly stabbed Baron, his own grandfather, to death. Paul then ordered the Fremen to keep the emperor and his family in prison. Paul then ordered his troops to slaughter all the Harkonnen and Sardaukar troops on the planet. As the days passed, the Fremen slaughtered the Harkonnen and Sardaukar troops. Gurney himself was also finally able to take revenge by killing Rabban. A few days later, from the sky, warplanes from large families were seen arriving. Paul ordered Gurney to release the prisoners. Paul also approached Chani. Paul said that he would always love her all his life. Chani was confused why Paul said that. In front of the prisoners, Paul said that the emperor's fate was now in his hands. Paul intends to marry the Princess Irulan. That meant Paul would be the next emperor. Chani was shocked to hear that. It turns out that all this time, Paul still had ambitions to become emperor. But before all that, the emperor must be responsible for the death of Leto Atreides, Paul's father. Paul challenged the emperor to fight him to the death or choose someone to replace him. Feyd-Rautha came forward and offered to take the emperor's place against Paul. Paul wasn't deterred. Paul then told Feyd that they were brothers, but Feyd wasn't swayed. He still intended to kill Paul. The fight began. The two men fought fiercely. Feyd could stab Paul in the stomach. Feyd then attempted to stab Paul again, but Paul pulled out the knife that was stuck to him and stabbed it into Feyd's chest until he died. Paul then managed to win this fight. Seeing this, Princess Irulan said that the debt of life had been paid. She asked Paul to forgive her father. Irulan would be willing to become Paul's wife, and that would make Paul become emperor. Paul then told Emperor Shaddam to bow down and kiss his hand. Emperor Shaddam bowed down and then kissed Paul's hand. Everyone bowed down to the new emperor, except Chani, who was sad. She decided to leave. Gurney then reported that he had gotten a message from the leaders of the other's big family. They didn't accept Paul's behavior in coupling the emperor. They refused to submit to Paul's orders. Paul realized that this was unavoidable. The next mission, Paul will destroy anyone who doesn't want to submit to him.